Last week, we considered Matthew's account of the birth of Jesus. And I submitted to you that Matthew's primary aim in his gospel is to show that Jesus is the Messiah of Jewish expectation, but with a twist. Jesus is the fulfillment of God's long-awaited promise to Israel, but in ways that do not necessarily fit snugly within widely held expectations about how that promise would be fulfilled. For example, Matthew introduces Jesus as Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The story of Jesus' birth that Matthew then tells, however, reveals that Jesus, in fact, is not exactly son of David. He's the adopted son of David, because he's actually something much bigger. Jesus is the Son of God. Matthew's message to his readers is that Messiah and the good news of his coming is something much more grand and wondrous, more radical, more meaningful, more important than anything you are anticipating or expecting. Because while the Messiah arises specifically out of the story of Israel, Jesus the Messiah is bigger than Israel. He is a Messiah for more than just Israel. He is a Messiah for all people, for all the world, indeed for all creation. Matthew has already hinted at this in his genealogy of Jesus. Jesus' family tree not only includes the names of 4 women, but 3 of these 4 women are foreigners. They're non-Jews. It's Matthew's way of reminding us that the story of Israel and God's relationship with Israel has always been bigger than just Israel itself. Way back from the beginning. Even Abraham, whose original name was Abram, wasn't a Jew when God spoke to him and made him a promise, called him to journey to an unknown land, that this previously unknown God would show him. Even King David wasn't fully Jewish. His great-grandmother was a Moabite, and his great-grandfather was a Canaanite. The story of Israel has always been bigger than Israel itself. And if Matthew hints at this through Jesus' genealogy before telling us the story of Jesus' birth, then he screams it out loud in recounting the series of events that unfold after Jesus is born. Luke identifies for us a group of lowly shepherds as the first to hear the news of Jesus' birth and venture to see the newborn Messiah. Matthew gives us the equivalent of another Abram. 3 more Abrams, in fact, in the form of magi who appear one day from the east, from the same direction that Abram himself would have come. I say 3 or more because Matthew never gives us an exact number. We have long assumed 3 because there were 3 gifts that were presented to Jesus and his family. But there could have been many more than 3. All we really know for sure is that there was more than 1 because magi is a plural word. And who were these magi anyway? However many of them there were. From what we know historically, they were priests within the Zoroastrian religion of Persia. Astrology was part of their faith practice, which is how many Bible scholars speculate that they knew a king had been born to the Jews, even though the star that Matthew describes clearly isn't just a celestial phenomenon or a planetary alignment of some kind. From Herod's palace in Jerusalem, at least, the star leads the Magi to Bethlehem, and it descends, it moves, it comes to rest directly over the house where Mary and Joseph and Jesus are living. What the Star of Bethlehem was or wasn't, and exactly how the Magi followed it, is a debate we don't need to get too caught up into. What we need to understand is what Matthew is showing us in retelling the story. That the Magi are Gentiles. They are pagan Gentiles at that. Pagan Gentiles to whom God has revealed the Jewish Messiah's birth. Pagans whom God has led to Israel, just as God led Abram to Israel. Pagan priests who know and understand who Jesus is before the scribes and priests in Jerusalem know and understand who he is. It's a scenario that to many of Matthew's day would have been more than, oh, that's not what we were thinking. It would have been completely unthinkable. Not just surprising, scandalous. I mean, these are unclean, damned heretics. They are foreign freaks who don't talk, dress, or believe the way that anyone in Jerusalem talks, behaves, or believes. Now, if they came on some sort of as part of some diplomatic delegation, Herod and the other officials might be willing to hear what they have to say, but from a religious or spiritual standpoint, these Magi are going to show up as agents of God? They're going to tell the priests of God? Are going to tell King Herod about the birth of the Messiah? Are you kidding? Are you seriously going to tell us, Matthew, that God showed these foreign freaks in Persia something that you didn't reveal to the leaders of God's people in Jerusalem? It's scandalous. It's ridiculous. But it's no more scandalous or ridiculous than God's call to Abram and Sarai, who would become Abraham and Sarah over the course of their journey with this same God, as a result of their journey with this same God. This is hardly the first time that God has done the unexpected, the unconventional, and it certainly won't be the last. If we have and keep the bigger picture of the biblical story in mind. Because the Messiah, the gospel, the good news we have received isn't just for Israel. It's for all people. It's for all the earth. It is for all creation. The gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham, is bigger than Israel. It's bigger than us too. It's bigger than you and me and this church. It's even bigger than the church. We need to keep the bigness of the gospel in mind always as we begin this year and every year. We also need to think about why and how the priests in Jerusalem, all these religious types, all the people who should have known and understood, how they may have missed it. How they missed what God was doing. Now, Matthew doesn't go into this, but as someone who is a priest of sorts by vocation, who spent a lot of time around churches and church people over the last 15 years, people who, as believers, all of you also are priests. That is part of our profession as Baptists, as Protestants. I'm pretty sure they probably missed it the same way we miss it too. They lost their way the same way we continue to lose ours by getting caught up in the business of being priests, of being holy and devout, by getting caught up in debates on social issues and particular points of theology and rituals and ceremonies, budgets and programs, all the things that keep us focused inward and on ourselves, even though we tend to surround them all with all kinds of godly language. Herod, too, was caught up in the business of leadership, of power, of being in power, of staying in power. So much so that when he heard the news of the Messiah's birth, even when he believed these pagan Persians who came before him, all he could think about was the political implications of Jesus' birth for himself. Power, ambition, they fully took over his heart and his mind, his priorities. And that happens to us too. But God is moving. God is on the move. And God has never and never will allow such earthly follies to hinder, much less stop, God's mission of love and grace and mercy. God's mission of redemption and transformation. We can ignore it, be oblivious to it. We can actively try to stop it. It doesn't matter. As Jesus himself will later say to the religious authorities who complain about all the ruckus he's causing when he rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. Even if these were quiet, he says, the very stones would shout out. But here's the thing. God wants us to shout out. God wants us to be part of the chorus. God wants us to be part of the journey. God wants us to be part of this story. Not just bystanders and witnesses, but active participants in what God is doing. We're going to be undertaking a vision process here at Kingsway in this new year of 2019. I'm not exactly sure what the process is going to look like exactly, not yet. The elders and the staff and our various ministry leaders are meeting on Tuesday evening to begin shaping that process. But as we wade into it, all of us, as Kingsway Baptist Church, my hope and my prayer is that we will keep the Magi and the Star of Bethlehem fully in our sights as we seek God's guidance and discernment. That we will keep the bigness of the gospel firmly in our minds. That we'll remain open to hearing God speak through unconventional people, open to God leading us in unexpected ways and in unexpected directions. That's what the poem that Caroline read by Malcolm Guite is about. It's what the prayer by Thomas Merton that's on the insert inside your bulletin is there to remind us of. We can't and won't always know. But what we can be certain of is that God is on the move, that God is moving and God is desiring to move us, and that God will be with us on this journey, in this story, because that's who Jesus is. That's who he was born to be, Emmanuel, God with us. And God will lead us forward, and we will see amazing things if we'll remember that God, the gospel, all of it is bigger than us. I think it's also important to remember the Magi because they show us one way in which we enter into this story, as big as it is, as unexpected as it often is. We enter into the bigness by being willing to set out on the journey that God bids us to undertake and to offer to Christ particular gifts that are worthy of who Christ is. Not just things that we have to offer, but things that are worthy to offer to Christ. What did they offer? Gold, frankincense, myrrh. Yes, things that they had. Yes, things that they could procure. But they gave these particular gifts because they're gifts worthy to offer Christ. Signs of his royalty, his kingship. Signs of worship, their worship that they are offering him. Symbols of Christ's death and resurrection, which is life-giving to all of us. How far are we willing to follow? How generously are we willing to give in response to the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham, the Messiah for all creation, for all people, for all of us? How will we respond to this good news? That is what we are seeking to understand. How God is calling us to understand. How God is calling us to follow. How God is calling us to journey together as Kingsway Baptist Church into the next chapter of our future. Together, and together with God and with Christ. May we, like the Magi, be willing to set out and follow the star that God shows us, however, wherever, and how far it may lead us, to whomever and with whomever it may lead us, knowing that God is on the move and that God is with us each and every step, each and every day, because that is who Christ is, Emmanuel, God with us. And God wants us very much to be an active part of the story of redemption and transformation, love and grace that God is still unfolding in our midst. Thanks be to God.